Hello again, and for today we are delving into the best of comics for the decade. However, unfortunately, we gotta start off with the worst of comics. So let's talk about the big two really big fucking just angering moments within comics that are not related to any of the social justice issues that I talk about in entertainment. This is just pure, like, who gives a shittery when it comes to comics. Number one, DC's New 52. It absolutely went nowhere. It's a fucking trash fire. Costume redesigns galore that inevitably just revert back to a more classic look for Rebirth. And yeah, it's just like, oh, we did this reboot that doesn't really matter. And so now we have a better reboot that actually just kind of resets the clock to everything. And it's not that DC's New 52 stories aren't canon, it's that they really didn't improve on anything DC. In fact, I think it kind of created this environment to where they thought that the Snyderverse could possibly be influenced by. And it's gross looking, I don't really care for it, it's not really DC, and even the movies are starting to drift back towards a more classic look for the animated features that Warner Brothers puts out for DC Comics. And so, really glad that we have moved on from that proverbial dumpster fire. However, there is a bigger dumpster fire, and this is truly the worst part of the decade, and it is Marvel Events. Marvel Events, who have not had good events truly since, like, the 90s. The Marvel Events have been on a steady decline ever since the 2000s. The 2010s are no different. There was shit like Age of Ultron that didn't matter, Secret Empire that doesn't really fucking add anything, Shadowland that should have been amazing and was just, again, another dumpster fire. War of the Realms, one of the worst comics of the year, if not the decade. Again, why do these events not matter? What is the point of having an event? Is it to sell comics? Because it doesn't do that anymore, and it doesn't fucking add anything great to the Marvel mythos. So, stop it. You're done, Marvel. I am not paying into another fucking event as long as I live. You know, Shadowland was one I tried, and War of the Realms is one I also tried. And each time I was just met with utter failure and disappointment. So I don't want more Marvel events going into the future. I will not participate in any Marvel events going into the future. And that is my fucking final saying on this shit. It's just awful. Awful. Alright, let's get out of the negativity. Let's go into the positivity. Let's go to number 10 on the best of comics for the 2010s. At number 10, we got Star Wars Age of Republic from Marvel Comics. Unfortunately, there was not a lot of Dark Horse Marvel, not a lot of expanded universe stuff. Legacy wrapped itself up nicely. Rebellion was starting to wrap up. The books were starting to wrap up from Del Rey. So we had to brace our assholes for what's next. And what's next was not only some good shit like Star Wars Obi-Wan and Anakin, Star Wars Kanan, but for me, the one-shot event of Star Wars Age of Republic added some truly good stories to the Disney canon, something that they desperately need ever since trashing the expanded universe. Really fun stuff with all your favorite prequel characters like Qui-Gon Jinn, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Anakin, Padme, General Grievous, Count Dooku, Darth Maul, Jango Fett, Mace Windu. I believe, no, the Emperor's not in there. And there's an Age of Republic special with Mace Windu, Jar Jar Binks, and Asajj Ventress. Real fun stuff, real good comics. I just wish, they were up to the caliber of the Dark Horse stuff overall. However, the Republic stuff is much appreciated given that Disney refuses to acknowledge the prequels era and has recently done some fuckery with the canon and the Disney lore of Star Wars and creating the Starkiller Incident timeline, which we can now officially call Disney canon with the Starkiller Incident timeline. So, very glad that Disney has now fully separated from reality, because that just means Star Wars can only get better from here. But let's move into number 9. Number 9 is Justice League Odyssey, written by Dan Abnett, drawn by various people, lettered by Darren Bennett. This is a great Justice League version of Guardians of the Galaxy, and it's not funny, like not like haha goofy. It's just some epic space fantasy set with a great team of Jessica Cruz, Green Lantern, Cyborg, Starfire, and Azrael Batman, or John Paul Valley. And what can I say? It's just a fun spacefaring adventure. Darkseid is heavily involved as the villain and sometimes ally of the Justice League Odyssey. And this is the Justice League book that no one's paying attention to, and really should be, because it is phenomenal work in the hands of Dan Abnett and Josh Williamson, who was the original writer of the first arc of stories, which is now in trade paperback. So highly recommend that you get on that shit. But let's move into number 8 with Matt Fraction's Sex Criminals. It's a fun book that's sexy, maybe a little degenerate, but it's not a sex book like some of the other ones that are currently out on the market. It is truly just a fun story about sex and orgasms giving you the ultimate superpower, and what kind of wacky world inhabits the nature of orgasm powers. And yeah, it's ridiculous, but it's a fun read, and for me, that's what makes comics good, is a good fun read. Preoccupy your time with, and give you a great story around a young couple who really is having frustrations in life and finds out that when they have sex together, they create a time vortex where they can do whatever they want. And obviously the villains are these sex police who, let's just say they're freaks and end it there. But yeah, Sex Criminals is a really funny and wacky book that I truly love as something adding to the comics medium this decade. And with that being said, let's move into number 7. Number 7 is the only ComicsGate book on the list. Now, technically, Earthworm Jim is a better book. However, the reason why it's not on this list, and number 7's Jawbreaker's Lost Souls by Richard Meyer, John Malin, and Brett Smith, along with various other artists, is in this list, is because it was the catalyst for the larger ComicsGate movement. We would not have other great books like Earthworm Jim and Ravage Kill All Men and the John De La Rose books if we did not have this initial push from Richard Meyer to say, hey, I want to make a book, and I want to make something that people, I think, would like. It's like G.I. Joe meets the X-Men of the 90s, and bing, bang, boom, we got a great, fun little comic about a military group that does a lot of mercenary jobs, but they also have super secret superpowers. So, again, fun read. This is what I want out of comics. I do not want all of this dumb shit that Marvel and DC pushes. I do not want indie garbage. Indie garbage can go into the direct garbage. And yeah, we need more of this in regular mainstream comics. So that is why Jawbreaker's Lost Souls is number 7. Number 6 is another very independent book from a company called Mad Cave Studios. It is Mark London's Battle Cats. And Battle Cats is a epic fantasy with these cat humanoids trying to solve the mysteries of what is going on in their kingdom and all of these hidden secrets of their lore. And again, it's fun D&D shit with some Thundercats-esque characters, but it's, instead of light space fantasy, it is all fantasy, and it is quite beautiful to look at with the artwork. And it's, again, just another wacky fun read that you should really look into. You should really look into all of the Mad Cave titles, but Battle Cats was the first one I picked up and the first one I got glued to. So, unfortunately, I am stuck being a member of the Battle Cats. So, moving into number 5, we have Rob Guillory's Farmhand. Rob Guillory was the artist of the book Chew with writer John Layman. John Layman turns out to have lived up to his last name, and he really is a lame man, because all of the talent that was in Chew is clearly demonstrated in Farmhand, and it shows that Rob Guillory is a force to be reckoned with in comics, and I think he will be one of the great writer-artists of the next decade if Farmhand continues to be such a excellent book. And here's to hoping, because it's been great so far. And let's move into number 4 with the recent Hawkman relaunch from Rob Venditti and a couple other creative people in his team. He has been consistently on this book since the relaunch of number 1. We are at number 19 or 20 now. And the man is delivering an Indiana Jones level adventure for a superhero that only people like me give a flying fuck about. And Hawkman is just so cool, so suave, so knowledgeable about his history, so in tune with his past lives and future selves. And even with the tie-in to the Year of the Villain, I am really digging Hawkman's little part to play, and really love that Hawkman, is a title worth gushing about on a year-end list. I love fucking Hawkman, especially after getting screwed in New 52. That was absolutely atrocious, Rob Liefeld. You should be ashamed of yourself. But let's move into number 3 with Rick Remender's Deadly Class. This is a great little series about an X-Men style school for assassins. They adapted it to a TV show this year to pretty good acclaim, and unfortunately it was canceled within 1 season because it's on the Sci-Fi Network, so fuck you, is essentially what they say to everybody. But Deadly Class as a comic is revolutionary. It's got a very great punk rock vibe. It's very in your face, very fuck you, very strange characters that all kind of gel together in their own weird way, and a great love triangle between our lead, Maria, and Soyono, I believe her name is. Anywho, all the links will be in the description, but Deadly Class is something that I got recommended to and really tugged at me in all the right ways. So let's move into number 2 with Fatal by Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips. Again, this is a comics duo of legend. They did such great work with Criminal last decade, with Incognito. Ed worked, I believe, with Sean and Michael Lark on Daredevil, and his run, easily the best run of last decade. Just fucking raped Brian Michael Bendis' run at the end of it. It was just so fucking dynamic. But Fatal is a neo-noir mixed with Lovecraft story that you just have to read to believe. And again, the art is gorgeous, and I can't really get over this team, and I hope they do more work this decade that's new and fresh, and maybe even another Incognito book. Fingers crossed. And yeah, they are the best in independent comics, easily. Every time there's an Ed Brubaker or something, I always have to at least make an effort to go out and read it. And yeah, I still need to read GCPD, man. That shit looked so good. So, we are now at number 1. And number 1 will shock a lot of you and shock a few of you. Or shock none of you. Because even though I hate events from the big 2 books, Power Rangers Shattered Grid has to be not only the event of the decade, not only the book of the decade, but one of the greatest comics of all time. I mean, you take a property like Power Rangers that, has had attempts at comic books in the past. You start off with this great Kyle Higgins story that takes place in the same time as the original Mighty Morphin season. And you introduce Tommy's, not alter ego, but alternate self, Lord Drakon, who is just hell-bent on crossing through the Shattered Grid, taking over every dimension, and controlling every single Power Ranger possible. And the Rangers put up a hell of a fight. This was an Avengers, Justice League, X-Men level event. I have not seen this good of a comic book event since the 90s. This shit was awesome. And, the follow-up event, which I believe is entitled Necessary Evil, is pretty good, but Shattered Grid was thoroughly well planned within the arcs of Boom's Power Rangers that they committed to this decade. I was so excited to start reading this. I committed to every single issue, and when I got them all and I sat down, I just read something that I thought was the most epic Power Ranger story of all time, and couldn't get enough of it. And, Ryan Perot is a great writer. Margaret Benite did some really cool stuff with her weird Beyond the Grid team that I love. However, Shattered Grid, I think, really helped to get the old fans excited about Power Rangers again, because it's not like the Neo Saban shows are the worst shows of all time, but they definitely were not aimed with a large audience in mind. And these books are aimed at everyone. You can go into Shattered Grid and only know like a handful of things and be totally fine with the story that is presented. However, I would recommend that you start from volume 1 of Boom's Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, because, again, one of the best comics of the decade. Easily the top of the list for Shattered Grid, though. So, let's get into the comics opinions. Number 1, Marvel sucked. Marvel, oh my god. Like, Joe Quesada left, and Quesada already fucking, like, attempted to light the house on fire. Axel Alonso burned that sucker to the ground, man. He just let these freaks run amok with the Marvel properties. And I, like our boy RJ and your boy Zach, have to blame Sana Amanat for turning Marvel into a lifestyle brand, to where all of these comics they put out now are just fucking garbage that sits at Ollie's and Five Below and places like that and doesn't get sold. This is a problem. We need people buying into comics. No one is buying into comics because Marvel is now a lifestyle brand. The movies are not selling comics, and comics are not selling movies. Marvel is now devoid of the comics, and if Marvel is not careful, they will lose the Marvel Comics side of the business. So, to Kevin Feige, please rectify the situation in the next decade, now that you have the reins of power. So, let's move into DC. DC didn't really engage until Rebirth. Again, New 52 kind of went nowhere. It seemed like a vehicle for producers of movies to look at the DC comics and go, let's adapt some of that. Let's do some of this. Let's do some of that. And, basically be a rival to Marvel on the big screen. However, it went nowhere. It's fucking cringe. The Justice League and Batman vs. Superman adaptations are kind of whack. And I only say kind of whack because BVS is so much worse. And people really need to fucking wake up and smell the coffee. But DC is on a better path now. I just really wish that they didn't fully commit to this New 52 cringe and just kind of let it exist on its own as its own Elseworlds alternate universe thing that they experimented with. And then Rebirth would just be going back to the main timeline. It's so fucking confusing right now, but that is the nature of DC Comics, so you either gotta live with it or just kind of ignore it like I do. And the next point is that indie comics are primarily SJW cringe if they are not properties already established. There have been multiple ComicsGate channels that have pointed out how fucking garbage a lot of the creative people running around in the industry are right now. Even some of the legacy people like Greg Rucka, Mark Waid, literally everyone. Like, there's so many names. And then, like, all the new idiots like Gabby Rivera, Brian Visaggio, all of these fucking retards are just, like, not comics people, and they're forcing themselves to work on comics so that they can fucking live in their shitty city apartment. And they are not good at what they do, and they should effectively be routed back to Tumblr, where they belong, writing fanfiction cringe. And I just don't see how this is a good idea in a business sense to be propping up these alternative lifestyle freakazoids. With that being said, because of all of this shit, this garbage in comics, there is not enough money to go around anymore. Comic sales are on the constant decline. You can see it on Comics Matter with your boy Zach's channel. They are constantly not selling the numbers that they should be. The numbers that they should be were in the millions in the 90s, in the 100,000s last decade, and now in the tens of thousands. It is disgusting. This needs to change, or otherwise we don't have comic books next decade. Now, what did consumers do to combat this? Well, in my next point, I am going to illustrate that ComicsGate happened and things mildly improved. Now, ComicsGate, much like Gamergate, was a consumer revolt. However, because comics are easier to produce than, video games, lots of artists and only a handful of writers have been able to pull themselves away from the mainstream industry and make their own comics. And as a result, we've got lots of, great titles, good titles, meh titles. Not a lot of stinkers, though. Fortunately, we do not have lots of stinker titles like we do in mainstream comics. However, there are lots of overhyped titles out there, and that is the issue I think a lot of people are running into, is that now that way more books are being delivered, we're seeing that some things are not as good of a financial investment as others. And to all the artists out there who have broken off, you need to convince some writers to get on the fucking train, because it's clear that you've spent your entire careers being artists, but we need more people than John De La Rose and Mark Pellegrini writing fucking comics out there. We need a good stable. I will be willing to step up at some point and write my own comic and have a friend draw it who I think can deliver. However, we cannot just rely on our little inner circles. We need to branch out. We need to show people like Sean Gordon Murphy that, hey, there is a better path than fucking doing comics the mainstream way. We can show them that Indiegogo is the way to go when it comes to delivering comic books. So, in conclusion, comics have hit probably the roughest patch of any entertainment industry that I've seen this decade. Lots of problems, need solutions badly, and, fortunately, there is a path forward with crowdfunded comics. There is a path forward with smaller labels like Antarctic Press and Mad Cave Studios. And fortunately, there are people who are willing to speak up and put their money where their mouth is in this industry and say, hey, I am not going to be paying for the subpar comics filth that's coming from the mainstream. And so to Marvel specifically, because DC does not engage in the same tactics that Marvel does. If you want to keep creating comics in the next decade, well, then you better tread lightly, because you are going down the path of destruction.